Hi, welcome to the Online Jewelry Academy. I'm Professor John R. and I'm your instructor. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about flux. Now, a number of you have written in and asked some very interesting questions about flux, but mostly you've been asking me, what kind of flux should I buy or what kind of flux should I use on my project? Well, I hope to answer some of those questions for you in this video, and as a special treat, I'm going to show you some homemade flux that some of you have been asking about as well. All right, so let's start from the beginning. What does flux do? Well, flux, no matter what type you use, helps to keep the surface of your metal object clean while solder flows into the seams and helps to unify and unite those pieces together so that they become one whole. Now, it doesn't matter if it's liquid flux or paste flux or homemade flux, they all basically work the same. But there are some pros and cons to each one. So let's start first with liquid flux. Now, there's a lot of different varieties of liquid flux on the market. They all tend to look similar to this. They're just kind of a thin liquid with a unique color to it. And what this is used for is it's used for high temperature soldering. So you could solder gold, platinum even, silver, but it's formulated to work best with hard solder, a high temperature melting solder. This type of flux will not burn away at a high temperature. It'll stay put and keep working hard. And if you even need to add some in the middle of your soldering operation, if you put it in a container like this one that has a little needle on top, you can just drip it right in. And because this type of flux is self-pickling, it'll clean up any oxides and you can finish your soldering job like that. Now, this one can be applied with a brush. You could dip a piece into it. It's pretty easy to control. All right, so let's go to the next one. Paste flux. This is the one that we're all familiar with. I demonstrate with it all the time. There are a number of brands on the market and they all pretty much work the same. Now, what is this one used for? It's used for silver brazing or silver soldering at a lower temperature, but you could still use it for hard solder. But the temperatures that it works at are much lower. And it will burn away eventually if you stay too long with the torch or your torch is too hot. But it works in most situations. And the good thing is, where the liquid flux only works with non-ferrous metals, the paste flux will work with all non-ferrous metals and ferrous metals. In other words, you can silver solder steel with this. So it's very, very versatile. And this one, you can't really dip into it because it is a paste, so you have to apply it with a paintbrush. And you can control it, but your control is going to come from using it in combination with yellow ochre. Just be sure not to contaminate your flux with the yellow ochre. Okay, now, what do they both have in common in terms of their formulation? They both contain boric acid. Now, another thing that you need to know is that they both have other safety considerations in common. Number one, you always want to wear eye protection whenever you're soldering. You don't want the flux or anything for that matter to pop into your eye or eyes. And the other thing is that they both give off some toxic fumes or noxious fumes. So you need to be working with good ventilation, no matter what type of flux that you're working with. Now, a number of you have written in and asked me questions about homemade fluxes. Well, I'll be honest, I usually only work with one kind, and it's the most basic flux you could ever possibly make. Now, I've heard good things about homemade fluxes. In fact, some jewelers have told me that they swear by the flux that they make themselves in their own studio. And I've also heard that it can be a lot of work to make those formulations. But homemade fluxes can be very, very useful, and there are a lot of recipes online that you can, work with. And what I would say is, if you're interested, why not buy some of the materials that you need to make your own homemade flux and do a little experimenting? Okay, so let me show you this one. This is the most basic thing. Remember I told you both of these contain boric acid? Now over here, I've got some boric acid. Now you can find this at most pharmacies, but you're going to have to look in some strange places like the foot care aisle. And I've already put some in the bowl. You can see it's just a white powder. Now what you do is you're going to take denatured alcohol. It's a very clean burning fuel. And you just put enough denatured alcohol into the boric acid to create a slurry. In other words, you don't want it to be too thinned out. You want it to be a little bit thick. So you just add a little alcohol at a time. And if you don't work with this on a regular basis, say you only use it maybe once a week or every other week, it may dry out. The alcohol will evaporate, but all you have to do is just add more alcohol to it. Okay, so let me mix this up a little bit better and clear the bench, and I'll come back and show you how to use this in a soldering operation. For this demonstration, I'm going to solder a step bezel to a split shank ring using our homemade flux. Now before you begin working, safety first. Remember, put on your eye protection. You don't want anything potentially popping into your eyes, and make sure you're working with good ventilation. And the OJA has a video on how to make a simple ventilation system for your bench. All right, so I've got the ring and the bezel sitting on top of the charcoal. Now what I need to do is set it up to be in place for soldering. And what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to pick up the bezel with tweezers, and I want to submerge it in this slurry of boric acid and denatured alcohol. And then I'm just going to place it on top of the charcoal block. Then what I want to do is I'm going to pick up the split shank ring and submerge it in the slurry. Now if your slurry isn't to a depth that you can completely submerge it, just move it around and just make sure that it gets completely coated. Okay, so now that I've got it coated, I want to position it so that it will be in place, the proper place for soldering. So you can just use your tweezers if you need to move it around and make sure that you have it properly centered. So once you have the project set up, close your container that has the denatured alcohol in it. You don't want to light that on fire. Then you need to ignite this. And I'm just going to turn on my torch and just ignite it and allow the alcohol to burn away. Now this is great because this will completely coat the ring and allow that ring to be covered by the flux so that it protects it from having more oxide develop on the surface than I would like. And it will also work as the flux that allows the solder to flow. Okay, so now that everything's nice and dry, I can pick up my solder pallions and position them. Let me just wipe off some of the flux from the tweezers. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to put pallions, you know what, I'm going to put them on the inside so that I can actually heat from the outside and draw the pallions or draw the solder underneath the ring. That way I make sure I have a good bond. It's not working. Looks like I need to re-wet the flux. Okay, I have my solder pallions in place now. Now, what you didn't see in the cutaway was I used the tweezers to dip the pallions back into the slurry to get them a little wet so that it would kind of melt the dried out flux that was already on the ring and just slip them into place. But now they're all there and we're ready to begin soldering. So what you want to do is just turn on your torch and heat the piece slowly so that the flux begins to melt and coat the piece. And then you just carry on as usual. So I just want to mention, I could have brushed the flux where I needed it, but that's a little challenging to do because the brush tends to suck up all of the alcohol and that would leave a dried out blob of boric acid on the end of your brush that's not going to move. Besides, doing it this way controls fire scale, and the OJA has a video on that. You can see some discoloration on the bezel. That's just the flux grabbing some of the oxides and combining with them. Borax, which is part of what boric acid is the most common element in fluxes, and it's something that's been around and used since Egyptian times. So how do you know which brand of flux is the right one for you? Well, you have to research ones that suit your materials choices and that match the temperatures that you normally work with. So my best advice is to experiment. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate this. Most commercial fluxes will work on most applications just fine. Okay, we're done with the soldering. Now, don't burn yourself. Be careful picking up your work and quenching it. And there we have the bezel attached to the split shank ring. Now, of course, this ring needs to be pickled, brass brushed, tumbled, polished, set, but you can see that it's entirely possible to solder something together using a very simple homemade flux. I hope you liked this video. Be sure to check out the other OJ videos that are on our playlist at onlinejewelryacademy.com. And remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Subscribers to the OJA receive weekly notifications of new videos. And don't forget, you can always help to support the production of new videos by supporting us through Patreon at www.patreon.com/onlinejewelryacademy. Thanks for watching.